Hi, everybody. I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit more about thinking deeply as we discussed yesterday, because I realized I missed a few things, actually, as I was thinking more deeply about this. So let's dive in. I want to discuss how thinking deeply will help us with directional correctness and how that tends to be, at least in my mind, far more important than precisional correctness. I think that it also helps significantly in terms of reassessing the things that we're doing, which can help us be far more adaptive and pivot when we need to, which is easy to miss if we aren't thinking deeply about things. And then the last piece is, given that life is full of speed bumps, I found that the thinking deeply will help us navigate this, not just in terms of the way that it'll help you pivot, but also to help you understand changes that are happening in your environment that will potentially allow new solutions that didn't exist before. So it's not just that you are avoiding obstacles, it's that you are gathering fellow travelers, sort of what we're doing on GTT. So let's first start by this initial idea of directional correctness versus precisional correctness. When we don't think deeply about things and we just sort of start with an idea, let's just put this sort of on this grid space, and let's say that we decide we're going to do this specific thing and it's at this point over here. Then what can often happen is we start at the 0, location, we'll just say, and then we start moving in this direction. Now, while we're moving in this direction, we're never really looking at what we're doing. We're just sort of walking a little bit mindlessly toward this thing. But in real life, this thing here often is moving. So maybe now it's here. And on top of that, as we're walking in a direction, the earth beneath us, or whatever is giving us our footing, can also pivot, and then it can start to shift us to move off of the direction that we think we're going. If we take a moment to pause and try to understand where we are, then it changes things in terms of our ability to focus on a problem and make sure that we are consistently solving maybe the right problem as the world around us evolves. So in this particular case, maybe what happens, the ultimate result is we end up here, and then the eventual goal is here, and we're very far away from it because we just decided right from the get-go, this is what we're going to do. We never really thought about, is this the correct thing that we're supposed to be doing? Did we look at other alternatives? We sort of just said, I'm going to go after this degree, or I'm going to run 10 miles a day, or something, without considering like the deeper ramifications as new evidence is coming in. So instead of doing that, what I think often happens when we think deeply is we again start out in our XY space, just to keep it simple, and we instead are surveying a landscape. So this is sort of our eyes. And what we realize is that this is where we want to head, this way. We want to go in this direction because this is giving us the general result that we want. So let's take the example of running. So why is it that we were going to try to run 10 miles a day? Well, maybe it was because we wanted to have really good cardiovascular health. Well, if the goal is really to have improved cardiovascular health, there's many ways to achieve this other than just running. You know, maybe running is here. Maybe swimming is here. Maybe hiking is here. Maybe rowing is here. Maybe boxing. Biking. Skiing. Right? You see how this works. So what thinking deeply, I think, often allows us to do is, one, to better understand what it is we're actually trying to solve. And then two, it allows us to survey the space to ensure that the things that we're doing are getting us toward that eventual goal. It's my strong conviction that directional correctness, moving in the right direction, like, for example, this goal of improved cardiovascular health, is far more important than the precisional correctness that we can get confused about as we're trying to solve a particular problem. So the precisional correctness in the prior example would be running. We're so focused on running, then what happens is we lose sight of the goal. We start focusing on things like, we got to get the best running shoes, we have to have the best running gear, what are all the races? And then suddenly we start to run into obstacles that are not even relevant to the overall goal, but they start to inhibit us. So let's continue with the running example. Now let's say that you live in some place that's super cold and you can't run outside. Now suddenly you're beholden to the weather. Let's say that it's really hot, and so you can't run outside. Maybe you don't have access to things like treadmills, and so suddenly you are frozen because you're so fixated on the precision of the solution. You're not considering that what the real goal here was cardiovascular health. And there's many ways to achieve this. Instead, you become fixated with this one particular point on the graph. I have to run, I have to run, I have to run. And running isn't always going to be the answer. Maybe it's something that you love, and maybe that's something that you do most of the time. But let's say that you're on travel and you can't run. But it turns out that there is a stair stepper at the hotel that you're staying at. But there's no treadmill. Okay, just do the stair stepper, right? This is what I think directional correctness allows. But more importantly, this is the kind of stuff that I think, at least in my experience, becomes extremely clear once you start to do the deep thinking in silence. On top of this, in addition to fixing sort of the issues that you have with precisional correctness, what's beautiful in my mind about the thinking deeply on the problem is that as we're moving in these directions, so again, let's say that we have this entire space, this entire direction here is essentially better cardio. This is worse cardio. You could replace cardio with anything. Better coding, better education, communication skills, so on and so forth. And this is all the opposite of that. This is, you're becoming a worse coder, you're becoming worse at communication, you're becoming less educated, right? And so the higher order bit is you want to be heading that way. You do not want to be heading this way. So anything really that's in that space, in this direction, is moving us toward this goal. Now, what's really interesting, I think, is that as you start to move in this direction, so now we're actually walking this space, because of the evolving landscape that is happening around us, we can sometimes get turned around. A good example of this might be vibe coding. Okay, so vibe coding has this notion that it's going to make us better programmers. It's going to make us write software faster. That's sort of the hype and the advertising that a lot of the big tech companies are presenting this with to essentially get our attention and get our money. But after we start to use these vibe coding things, again, if you think deeply about them, you don't just take it for granted that, oh, everything that they're saying is true. If you do that, then what can happen is you end up way over here. But if you stop and allow yourself this moment where you can think deeply, this is you thinking deeply, you can catch yourself. You can realize, uh-oh, I actually just made a U-turn. Initially, I thought that this was making us better. This is making me a better coder. But it turns out that after experimenting with this is actually making things worse. I need to stop doing this and shift over here. And if you think that this is sort of disconnected from reality, I would encourage you to think in your own experience in life on things that you've seen that we've initially thought are good things, and then it turns out that they're really bad things. A few concrete examples that, believe it or not, were praised at some point in time as being really good for you. Smoking. And whether or not we get for or against nicotine, which I think is a separate discussion. I'm talking about just cigarettes. Cigarettes, I think, in general, have been shown that there's sort of no real benefit to them because of things like the tar that's in them and the damage that they cause to your lungs. But at one point, cigarettes were actually promoted as like being doctor endorsed. Here's another one in case you don't buy into the smoking. This is the food pyramid. And at the bottom of this pyramid were essentially carbs, including things that are very high in sugar. This is literally guidance that the US government was giving many people for a long time, and we can even kind of look this up in the event that you have some kind of disbelief. Let's do that right now. Now, at this bottom level of the pyramid, right, just like I was showing, these are all your carbs. And this, for a very long time, would include things, it still does, these simple sugars, processed things, and just general stuff that is, as we know now, not necessarily really good for us. Instead, we want something that looks maybe a little bit more like this, but this is not the original food pyramid. The original food pyramid was more like this. And see all these complex carbs down here, these starches? In general, we sort of understand that these things are not necessarily very good for us. In some small moderation, sure. What we really should be having are like these vegetables and proteins more toward the bottom, at least from my understanding of thinking about things like paleo. But this is concrete evidence that even the view of the world today can be very misguided. And so if you take the same example, going back to our better cardio, let's say that you're taking this advice and you're doing all of this stuff, it could be that just your diet here is sending you in the wrong direction. Even though you're doing the right exercises, your diet doesn't match that. And as I think most of us that are strong advocates of healthy lifestyles know, that you normally need both of these things together. That you likely need a healthy diet, and you also need some degree of exercise. It's not just one or the other. Eating healthy is fantastic, but you also want the exercise for things like cardio health, bone density, lean muscle mass, all of these things. So in addition to being used to help guide us in the right direction, using the thinking deeply can help us reassess where we are and then get us off the wrong path in the event that we get U-turned by various things that are going on in the world, like the society that we live in saying, yeah, you can go ahead and have tons and tons of sugars and you're going to be fine. Just keep the fat down, which is, as we know now, not necessarily true. But you could use your own judgment on these things. You could be saying, wait a second, I don't feel that well, rather than sort of just following this blindly and just sort of doing all the stuff that people are telling us to, because we're trying to be precisionally correct, right? Like this pyramid is showing us. This is an example of precisional correctness, rather than, well, what are we actually trying to achieve here? Oh, we're trying to achieve a healthy lifestyle. I don't feel that healthy. My cardiovascular is getting worse. My blood pressure is declining. All of these things seem to be moving in the wrong direction rather than the right direction. Maybe this isn't the correct path. And so using the thinking deeply, I think, can help us pause, reassess where we are, and then make sure that we haven't been turned around. And in fact, we were just working on something at Merle, and it dawned on me that something we were doing that made sense a couple months ago does not make sense today. And so we had to do this pivot. If I hadn't been thinking deeply about these problems, principally in silence, I might have missed this. So I very quickly just wanted to add a little bit more color. I think that mostly covers the high-level intuition of what I wanted to share, that when you think deeply, it's more than just you figuring something out that you're going to be married to your entire life. It's more that, as we've talked about before, you're thinking deeply on these complex problems, then you're iterating. So you start with the deep thought, and my preference is sort of in silence. There are times of collaboration, but let's assume that this is a moment where you have the general understanding of the problem, and now it's about identifying valid solutions and knowing the right direction to take, right? Then once you have that, you start moving in this direction, but you continue to iterate. You don't just take the solution that you have as your marching orders, and then you just continue to walk this path, and the goal is moving on you, but you're never looking up at the mountain, so to speak, that you just continue marching off into Never Never Land, and you end up in outer space over here, even though the actual goal was here. But if you had been following the goal as it was moving, what would have happened is you would have just done this. You would have consistently pivoted your direction as the goal is shifting, or you will pivot your direction, in this case, like the vibe coding, to where you start. So let's just draw a new graph. You are trying to become a better coder, and so you know that, like, this is the direction I want to go in, so you start doing this, and then suddenly you start doing the vibe coding thing, and then that actually starts sending you here, but you pause and you reevaluate. You think deeply about this. Am I actually getting better? Can I solve problems more deeply? What are various demonstrable data points that show this? Oh, there aren't any? Wait a second. Maybe I'm actually going the wrong direction. And then you course correct, and then you continue moving in this direction. So these, I think, are some of the core benefits for thinking deeply, processing things, in my case, in silence, and continuing to iterate on them. My strong conviction is it's not sufficient just to think deeply about these problems once, but rather to do this in perpetuity. As I was mentioning last time, this is something that I do almost every day, and I think that this is part of the reason why. Now, I also want to share that I'm probably not explaining this perfectly, but my hope is that this explanation will give you at least the essence of the directional correctness. While I'm not probably nailing this as far as the exact precision of the explanation, my hope is that this is going to move you into the direction of deeper thinking rather than shallow thinking. And as long as I'm achieving that, we do not want to go in this direction. We want to move in this direction. As long as I'm making forward progress with all of us in that way, that we're moving directionally correct, I'm feeling pretty good about this. So feel free to leave comments and share your thoughts about this. I would love to hear other things that all of you do that help you out on the day-to-day, because this is something that I'm constantly looking to evolve in. I don't think that I have all the answers, but this is something that I think is super important, and I'd love to hear what the rest of you Jeters have to share on this. Okay, thanks guys.